Hello everyone, it's Dylan from Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything, and welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh! Video. Today is the 20th anniversary of the Pyramid of Light Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie. The Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie that released in 2004 on August 13th. And yes, it's been 20 years since this movie's come out, in case you needed another reason to feel super old. I remember seeing this movie as a 9-year-old kid in the theaters, and it's unbelievable to think that we have actually hit the 20-year anniversary of this movie. And I have not done any video on my channel in the almost 9 years that I've been making Yu-Gi-Oh! Content on the Pyramid of Light movie, and there's a pretty good reason for that. It's the Pyramid of Light movie. I am not a big fan of this movie. Now, recently, I did rewatch this movie over on Twitch with my chat and community. We watched the dubbed version followed by the subbed version, and funny enough, a lot of people don't even realize that a subbed version of this movie even exists. A lot of people feel this movie was like Capsule Monsters, where it's only a dub-only thing and there's no actual Japanese version, but that is not the case. What's even weirder, though, is that the Japanese version of this movie came out after the English dub. The dub movie came out in 2004, and the Japanese movie came out in 2005, which is definitely really weird, considering that usually it's the other way around, where we get the original subbed version and then the English dub later. So I wanted to revisit this movie, given the fact that it is the 20-year anniversary, and a lot of people have been requesting me to review this movie for quite some time now. Famously, this movie is considered one of the worst movies ever made, which on Rotten Tomatoes it garnishes at this current point a 6%. I believe at one point it was like 3%, and you know, that kind of became a meme in the Yu-Gi-Oh! Community, just how many people really did not like Pyramid of Light. When comparing it to the other Yu-Gi-Oh! Movies, I do feel like it is the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie of the bunch, ignoring the Season 0 Toei movie because it's literally only 30 minutes long, and I feel like that doesn't really qualify it to be a movie. It can call itself a film, but it needs to be at least, you know, an hour, I think, and you could argue is Bonds Beyond Time even at that length. That's one of the things I don't really love about Bonds Beyond Time, but Bonds Beyond Time at least was, like, cool and did not break continuity as badly as Pyramid of Light did, which is a big reason that I really don't like the movie all that much. And then Dark Side of Dimensions, which is the most recent Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie we've ever gotten, I think is the greatest Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie we've ever gotten. I think it is as close to a masterpiece for a Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie as you can possibly get. And so Pyramid of Light does not come close to Dark Side of Dimensions, and Bonds Beyond Time is better, in my opinion. Is it as bad as 3%? No, absolutely not. After watching this movie in the dub and in the sub, I'd probably give it somewhere like a 4.5 or 5 out of 10. Like, I think it's decent, but it probably trends more towards the bad side than good side. One of the big issues I have with Pyramid of Light is the continuity issues. This movie is supposed to take place after the Battle City tournament. However, there is a shot in this movie that is blatantly from Season 4, which is, of course, the Doma arc, which takes place after the Battle City tournament in the anime, even though this movie is supposed to take place before the Doma arc. Now, you could say that, hey, maybe they just wanted a shot with the pharaoh and the 3 Egyptian gods, and they had to use this shot because it's the only one that exists, which I would probably agree that's the reason they used it, but, like, that does create a big continuity issue. And I know Yu-Gi-Oh! Doesn't really care too much about continuity, but there are a lot of fans, myself included, that really do care about things from a timeline perspective. Some people are just curious about it, and other people are very intense about it, like myself. So already I'm kind of pulled out of this movie right from the get-go because it includes an item in the Pyramid of Light and a villain in Anubis that is just never mentioned outside of this movie in the original Japanese version. I know in the dub, Tristan has like a one-liner about how Pegasus was nice to them the last time they saw him, which probably refers to Pegasus's role in this movie. But like the English dub also kind of does things on their own, and it's not the original source material. So the whole weird continuity of where this movie actually exists is a bit of an issue for me. For those that maybe need a quick reminder, the movie centers around Seto Kaiba's obsession with beating Atem now that Atem controls the 3 Egyptian gods. He's running all these tests to try to learn or study the different ways that he's able to beat the pharaoh, and his scientists, his dual data geeks, can't figure out a way to defeat the Egyptian gods with his current deck. So he goes to see Pegasus, thinking that Pegasus must have created a way to stop the Egyptian gods if necessary. While this is going on, there's explorers that have unearthed the tomb of Anubis. They all get trapped, pretty much dying right on the spot. Actually, the Japanese version shows a lot more death than the English dub version does, leaving no question that these explorers definitely died, where it's maybe a little more ambiguous in the English dub. I mean, it is a pretty brutal sequence of events, but this, I guess, unleashes Anubis, who infects Pegasus's deck in his sleep. So when Kaiba goes to see Pegasus, Kaiba ends up defeating Pegasus in a duel. He gets 2 cards from Pegasus's card pile that he believes Pegasus made to defeat the Egyptian gods. Pegasus claims there was only one, which of course was Blue Eye Shining Dragon, which was a really, really cool card to see in this movie. And the other card that Pegasus had no idea about was Pyramid of Light, which of course ties to Anubis. Now, while this is going on, Yugi and Taya are escaping the, fanfare of Yugi being the Battle City champion, having all the 3 Egyptian gods. And of course, they go to a museum, because who wants to spend time in a museum? And Yugi and Taya and Grandpa Moto, who's just there, are looking at this new artifact called the Pyramid of Light. I think that's another thing that I don't necessarily love about this movie. A lot of it just feels super convenient, and it feels like things that are happening are just like unrealistic. And I know that might be a silly criticism to have for a Yu-Gi-Oh anime, especially a Yu-Gi-Oh movie where they are time crunched, but it just feels like they tried to make so many things line up perfectly, and everything literally had to line up perfectly for this to happen. Anubis planting the card in the deck, the Pyramid of Light all of a sudden being displayed at the same museum that Yugi and Kaiba are in, and it just feels like everything happens so quickly, and the pacing of the movie is very, very strange to me for that reason. They leave the museum and Mokuba Kaiba's there with a car, knew exactly where Yugi was, and says, hey, you have to come and duel my brother right away. Like, there were just a lot of things that felt very goofy about the plot line and what led up to the events, where I didn't feel that way in Dark Side of Dimensions. It felt like everything flowed a little more naturally from a time sequence perspective. So that was another thing that I don't really love too much about the movie. But I will say one of the highlights for me was seeing Maximilian Pegasus again. After his arc in the very first season, in the manga, he dies, and in the anime, we really don't see him again for the rest of the show. He does little things here and there, but we don't really get to see him duel fully on screen until Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. So seeing him duel against Kaiba, seeing how animated his toon monsters were, is always one of my favorite elements of the movie. But then after the Kaiba versus Pegasus duel comes to an end, I know that things are going to get a little, mid, if I'm going to be honest with you. We get another Yugi versus Kaiba duel, because why not? And as this duel goes on, we realize that Kaiba is kind of being influenced by Anubis, but Anubis does not. This is another huge issue I have, and I know this is kind of a review/rant. Anubis doesn't make his on-screen debut until like 70 minutes into the movie. Anubis literally doesn't show up until there's like 20 minutes left of the movie. And for me, that is just a really, really poor way to do a villain. And Anubis suffers from the same thing that I thought Zark suffered from in Arc 5, where in the flashback, we see how cool the character looks, right? Zark looked so cool in Arc 5, and then when we actually see him get ready to duel, he's like this weird, ugly gargoyle demon looking thing, which looks nothing like he did in the flashback. Whereas with Anubis, I love the way he looked, where he had like the dog head on. That is such a cool look. And then when we actually see Anubis show up in this duel as he takes over for Kaiba, he just looks like some generic jacked muscular dude. He almost looks like the Tarzan guy from Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. I just think that is a really weird decision to go with. I would have loved to see him, I guess, in his like god form, if you will, with the head of the dog. I think that would have looked so cool, like the vision we saw of him earlier in the movie. And then the backstory also is so generically bad when it comes to Anubis, that he fought to try to, I guess, destroy the world, and he fought Atem 5,000 years ago, and Atem defeated him and sealed him away. It is the most generic backstory I have ever heard. And the fact that Atem didn't remember him, and then by the end of the movie, like, kind of remembered him, but we didn't get any scenes or sequences from the actual fight that Atem and Anubis had, it made me really just not give two damns about Anubis. And I genuinely think he's one of the most poorly done villains in probably the entire Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise, and a movie is only as good as their villain. Look at Bonds Beyond Time. Paradox at least had a connection with Iliaster and Zone and Aporia, and he was referenced multiple times in that final season in Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, even shown in a flashback right as Yusei's delivering the final attack against Zone. Look at Aigami in Dark Side of Dimensions. Learned about his backstory, got that whole backstory scene with Shadi and Yami Bakura, and we cared about Agami, and he was a very, very well done villain. And Anubis is just like a generic, forgettable waste of a villain, and that's probably the biggest problem that I have with the movie. And by the time he steps into the duel has pretty much reached its conclusion. Atem ends up defeating him, through the power of friendship. You have the friendship speech where Yugi and Taya and Joey and Tristan are all trapped within his puzzle, fighting off the zombies. There were a couple of like cool shots within the Millennium Puzzle of like the Pyramid of Light trying to overtake the Millennium Puzzle. I thought that was a very visually appealing shot. Seeing Yugi and Kaiba duel is always an absolute pleasure. I'll never say that it's not. So I really did enjoy like seeing the two of them go at it, but it's not as good as any of their duels from the Duel Monsters anime. I even think the Exodia duel from episode 1, even though it is super basic, is more enjoyable to watch than their duel here in the Pyramid of Light movie. And all in all, Pyramid of Light to me has always felt like an attempt by somebody, whether it was pushed by 4K Media at the time or Konami or TV Tokyo and whoever. It always felt like it was a blatant cash grab. I believe that Pyramid of Light is maybe the most soulless project that Yu-Gi-Oh! Has ever done, and it felt like it was an attempt to really capitalize on the massive hype that the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime brought in the early 2000s, when anime was at its peak, Sonic X and Pokemon and One Piece, and dubbed anime was just at its apex. And I felt like this movie was made just to try to get a few extra bucks in the door. And it's like, you just look at the movie and it feels that way, right? Like Dark Side of Dimensions had so much heart and it felt like a true proper sequel. What does this movie do for the characters and the story of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters? To me, it does absolutely nothing, because it doesn't tie in with absolutely anything, circling back to one of my big issues with it when it comes to continuity. And it feels like they just crafted this generic, typical villain, almost like a flavor of the episode, flavor of the week villain, Anubis, in order to step in the way of Atem and Kaiba here. And then you have Yami Yugi and Kaiba duel, because that's your bread and butter duel. And that's like the only duel that you have. I know they had Kaiba versus Pegasus at the start, but for a 1 hour, 30-minute movie, I'd like to see a couple more duels, right? And I know I keep comparing it to Dark Side of Dimensions, but there's really not many movies to compare it to. Dark Side of Dimensions had a few duels, and none of them really felt rushed. None of them felt poorly executed. So it is possible to have multiple duels in a movie of this length. But instead, we get Kaiba versus Pegasus, and then we get your you know, main event, which is Kaiba versus Yugi. It's such a generic main event to have, and for that being like really the only duel of note and of length in this movie, with of course Anubis interrupting it, really just feels like it was a cash grab. And looking back on it 20 years later, my opinions have not really changed all that much. Maybe they've gotten a little better, but like, you know, I still give the movie, as I said, a 4.5, maybe a 5 out of 10. And I'll be honest, I think Yu-Gi-Oh! Pyramid of Light is the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Media we have ever gotten. Ever. I think it's the worst Yu-Gi-Oh! Media that's ever been created. I don't mean to just keep piling it on. It's not all bad. I mean, there are some really cool moments. Blue Eyes Shining Dragon is really cool. Just, again, being able to see Pegasus and Yugi and Kaiba all duel, you know, is always a pleasure. And whenever we can get that, even outside of the main anime, like, that's great. But the movie really did feel pointless and soulless, and I think that's the biggest issue that I have with Pyramid of Light, even 20 years later. And yeah, I do think that even something like Capsule Monsters, which I just watched not too long ago, I enjoyed Capsule Monsters more. Capsule Monsters is very obviously supposed to be like, you know, in its own continuity, but I like what Capsule Monsters was going for. Like, it felt like it at least had a little bit of purpose. It's not, like, great or maybe even, like, very good by any means, but I do prefer it to this movie, and I prefer all the anime, including all the spin-off, all the manga. I prefer every other thing we've gotten in media form of Yu-Gi-Oh! To Pyramid of Light. So, you know, it's not a really a positive review here on the channel, which, I love this franchise, but I'm just being totally honest. I think probably the thing that speaks volumes is the fact that I have never made a video on this movie at all, ever, in the 8 years I've been doing this channel, and I hope I did a good job kind of outlining why that is the case in this movie. There's a lot of things that just feel not very well done, and I don't know. I keep going back to the word soulless because it feels soulless. But what do you guys think, man? I mean, am I being too harsh? Again, I do still give it like a 5 out of 10. Like, I still think it's a decent movie. You know, it doesn't deserve a 6% on Rotten Tomatoes. I mean, that would be me saying it's like a 0.6 out of 10. No, absolutely not. But then again, like, if you're not a diehard Yu-Gi-Oh fan, you know, is there much like appeal in this movie? I don't really. Then again, you could say, is there much appeal in any Yu-Gi-Oh movie? Probably not. But yeah, Pyramid of Light is a bit of a blemish, in my opinion, on the Yu-Gi-Oh franchise. But still fun to watch, fun to look back on, and very interesting to see the differences in the dub and the subbed version. Not many of you guys might know this, but the subbed version is actually 10 minutes longer than the English dub version. But, like, there's no scene that's really significant that's cut. There's some major pacing decisions where, like, we're with Seto Kaiba in the original version for most of the original version, I guess, is the dub. In the subbed version for the entire first 25 minutes, and then we get to Yugi, where the dub decided to split up the scenes of Kaiba, then Yugi, then Kaiba Pegasus, then Yugi. So that was pretty interesting. But, you know, it's got such a forgettable villain, and the continuity issues. I mean, you know, I've kind of outlined it all. But I would love, love, love to know your thoughts on Pyramid of Light. 20-year anniversary. Do you guys agree with me? Is it the worst Yu-Gi-Oh movie ever? And would you go a step further? Would you say it's the worst piece of Yu-Gi-Oh media that we've ever gotten? I know that might be a little... I don't even know if that's a hot take, because I know this movie's not very well enjoyed. But let me know all your thoughts down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day. Take care, guys.